Okay, and that is one of the greatest opportunities that Eastern Shore Community College has in its backyard, and that is the NASA Wallops Flight Facility and the presence of Mars, Virginia Space, and the space flight activity that happens there. And I'd like to call upon Mr. John Floyd, our electronics faculty member, who's going to share with you some of the things that we have done in partnership with student internships with NASA, the various contractors that are there, as well as then some specific things that we have done that will be discussed with respect to Mars. So John?
Thank you. And I'm going to try to be brief because I'm talking about history, and we've got some folks here to talk about the future, which is much more exciting. But anyway, I'm going to share information about 3 specific experiential learning activities that we've used to supplement the curriculum that we have in the electronics program. Rock On, RockSat-C, and then our Lean Internship program. Rock On is a week-long, is billed as a how-to workshop, and the how-to is build a science payload on that. So at the beginning of the week, a team of 3 to 4 people will start with a Tupperware box full of parts. 3 days later, they'll have that assembled into something that looks like this, where we have a microprocessor, controllers, some various sensors, Geiger counter, and it changes from year to year, but that's the basic configuration of them. This will get integrated into a standard canister, which is loaded into a rocket, 2-stage rocket, and it's sent 70 miles, pretty well straight up in the air, back down into the Atlantic Ocean. The first year I did this with 2 of my students and found it to be a very rewarding experience, and then in the years following that, we've sent only student teams out of that. And I want to mention how I got into that was from an advisory board member, and he said, John, you should do the Rock On workshop. And I said, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. He says, no, listen to me, you need to do the Rock On workshop. So it was presented to me that way. I didn't have a lot of choice. The other part, RockSat-C, which is a follow-up to it, RockSat-C is a year-long experience, and it's a competitive process where students present ideas for a payload that are their own ideas. Every one of these that are made are the exact same thing out of that. So it can occupy either that half can or a full can out of that. We went through, we did that twice so far. And one of the neat aspects of that is that their payload is put through all the paces as any other NASA payload. Again, it's competitive, and so they present a conceptual design review. Here's what we would like to do. Preliminary design review with plans, eventually through to flight readiness review, and step through each process that any other NASA payload would do. So it's a great insider's tour to the whole suborbital program. I want to make one note from the program also. It mentions that we have launched CubeSats before, which is actually incorrect. These are payloads go on a suborbital flight, and they do not achieve the velocity they need to establish orbit. They're straight up in the air, back down in the Atlantic Ocean. They're recovered the same day and returned to you. And the other one is Lean Internships. We were funded by National Science Foundation to take a look at lean manufacturing practices and see if we could apply those to internships to increase value and eliminate waste in those processes. And we've been very successful out of that. We have placements, again, with our folks from Virginia Space, one of the spinoffs out of that. And I'll let them tell you more about our graduates who have ended up there, but also with a lot of big names in aerospace, Orbital ATK, LJT, VT Group, and a number of other smaller contractors that we have placed things. I want to make 2 points about internships on this one, then I'll move on. And I could promote internships the rest of the day, so Dr. Glover, watch me on time. If I get carried away, you stop me. One is about vision, and I like this picture with a chain link fence in it. We have a high unemployment rate in our region, but we also have a lot of jobs that are not filled, high-paying jobs, but they require technical skills, and they're behind that chain link fence. And it doesn't show in that picture, but there's an armed guard on that. So a lot of students have the mysterious things happen behind that fence. And so one of the things that happens, we get students behind the fence, they see the jobs, they meet people, and they start to have the realization that maybe I could do that too, that it's not just something mysterious out of it. The other one is for these aerospace jobs, and probably many jobs in your area too, there is a lot of very specialized equipment, and it is a challenge, to say the least, to provide laboratory experience which is relevant when they move out to the job site. All right, now I'm still talking about internships, but I'm going to go off on a little tangent. Have you ever taught anyone to ride a bicycle? Who's that? Come on, we have some participation here. I got a few. So here's how it went, right? First, you taught them about acceleration due to gravity, right? And you worked out some force and mass equations on that. And then we have to have centrifugal force, right? And eventually we work our way up to some dynamics problems, and we're going to achieve dynamic equilibrium on this bicycle, right? Wait, you still don't know how to ride a bicycle. Don't worry about it. We have an app for that. We can put you in the bicycle simulator for a week or two, and then you'll be really good at it, I promise. And if that doesn't do it, let's watch a few YouTube videos of people riding bicycles. Maybe that'll help, right? In fact, I'll even demonstrate it for you. I'm going to ride, now you know how to ride a bicycle, right? And so that, of course, that's ridiculous. And so we can't provide the exact relevant experience in a lab that prepares people to work on this very specialized equipment. So we need partners. We need partners to send students out to the workplace to get those kinds of experiences. The impact out of Rock-On, we've had 25 students go through Rock-On and RockSat-C out of that. And I know you would be very disappointed if you came to a conference, you didn't get to see some pie graphs and charts. So I wanted to have at least a couple for you. Of the 25 on that, we have never had a student drop out. And I realize that, the correlation is not necessarily established causality, but frankly, if you're getting ready to build something to be launched into space, it's not time to drop out of school, right? That level of excitement carries through, and every single person is either still with us or has stayed and graduated that ever participated in that. Results of the internships, and you notice the number, we have 52 total placements with 46 unduplicated headcounts. Some students have been out to multiple intern sites out of that. Some were requested to stay on because they got involved in a project and the host wanted to remain there. We have 40 of those at this point are now working. 34 of those, or about 75% of them, are actually employed in aerospace. 2 are currently enrolled. And to be conservative out of that, a couple of them wandered off, and I don't know where they went. So we didn't count those. They just counted as not completed that. So we have again, we're 87% that we know are actually employed and using technical skills at this point. Another aspect of it is recruiting. And for our last round of RockSat-C, what the students proposed was, we called it Shared the Space. And so my students, electronic students, designed what we called a little mini payload, which was a small board modeled after the Rock-On payload that had a microcontroller on it. We put those together as a kit, and then we had ages 9 through 15 build those. We had 10 student participants, K-12 participants out of that. And so you can see, here's the idea out of it. Here's one of the guys. He built this thing. It's going to get launched into space. One of the really surprising fun aspects of that was seeing my college students work with those 12 and 13-year-olds. Because as far as they're concerned, these guys are adults. They're experts in this, right? So it really put some burden on them, and they had to step up to the plate and really meet the game to show them that they knew what they were doing and demonstrate that. So very, very cool interaction out of that. There's the rocket carries up. Again, RockSat-C, Rock-On, both go in the same canister, get launched from that. You see the crowd of people. This is pretty close up. Now, these guys launch big rockets. You don't get to stand that close to them when they go up, do you? So it's a neat experience. If you've never been to a launch to start with, it's really, really fun to go to a launch. I've been to a lot of them, but it's a different experience when it's a launch and you built something that's on that rocket and now it's on its way to space. So those 12, 13, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds got to experience that. They got to bring, they brought two guardians, parents with them out of that. And so that really just mushrooms out through social media. And, oh, look, and on YouTube, man, my son sent something into space. So, I consider that recruiting. I consider any good publicity recruiting out of that. And you can look. I mean, I throw this one in there just so you can see the look on her face. It's like really, really excited they built something and it's going to space out of it. A lot of other people get excited about it. I know you can't see all the pictures and read the text out of this, but I wanted to share it. Electronics Technician Association was very nice to us. We were the cover story on their bi-monthly high-tech news out of that. They ran lots of pictures and a great description of the project. And I have some copies of that one. On that one, all of the research says that you really need to target that middle school age for career decisions, but you don't get results right away, right? So I don't know. Will any of those people in the picture, will they be our students 5 years from now? I don't know. We'll wait and see. We hope so, but we really don't know that one. And then the other part of it is like, hold on, space flight is really, really expensive, right? So we have received funding, and we are the smallest community college in the state of Virginia, and if we can manage to do this, then you can too, right? Because lots of budget, Dr. Glover, right? So we find ways at it, and we have received support we started out with a grant from the American Association of Community Colleges, which is a MentorLinks grant. It was $20,000, but it put us in contact with a lot of people and gave us a lot of training for how National Science Foundation grants work. If your college has never had an NSF grant or hasn't had one in the last 10 years, you're eligible for this. It's certainly worthwhile doing. So I'll share more information with that if you want to do it. We followed that up. From the MentorLinks, we were successful, and we were funded by National Science Foundation for a 3-year period, and that funded our internships. And we included other experiential learning opportunities, and so that was the Rock On and RockSat C. Share the Space, our second RockSat C one was funded by the Virginia Space Grant Consortium, and you're a member of that. If you're in Virginia Community College, you're already a member of the Virginia Space Grant Consortium, so you have friends there, and they can help you with things like that. And our foundation gets behind this. It's fun, it's exciting, it's cool to send stuff into space, and it's easy to gain support for that. All right, so that's what we have done out of that, and I'm gonna turn it over at this point to what the future holds for that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Dale Nash, the CEO and Executive Director of your Virginia Space Authority, much like the Port Authority, except we're the Spaceport Authority. Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right, how many of you know that we launch rockets in Virginia? How many of you knew that before we had the rocket blow up the launch pad? Okay. When you have a launch pad blow up and it makes all the news media, all of a sudden everyone realizes we're launching big rockets out of Virginia here on the Eastern Shore. We are the Virginia Commercial Space Flight Authority, or Virginia Space. We own and operate the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport. Acronym happened to come out as MARS, imagine that. But it also helps on the Delmarva Peninsula, in that Maryland views that as, Mars as being part of Maryland, and even Delaware helps on that too. So oftentimes in DC we'll have a letter with 6 senators on it from the state of Delmarva, which happens to have 6 senators and many representatives. So, a lot of words here. When I worked 15 years on the Space Shuttle program, and we worked very closely with the community colleges down in the Cape Canaveral area in Florida to train technicians, to a point where we end up with an entire curriculum that said, if you want to come be a technician or a quality inspector, you complete this course, and then we know you're qualified to interview. Didn't mean that others couldn't come in, but it meant we knew you were qualified when you came in. Well, I'm not that big here, and in between Florida and Virginia, I ran Alaska's space program, launching rockets off Kodiak. Had a really tough time getting qualified people there. You can bring in people from Florida, and you're paying a lot of money. They're qualified people, you're paying a lot of money, and they don't tend to hang around, and they want their housing paid for and stuff like that. In Kodiak, they have the largest Coast Guard base in the U.S., in the world, actually. So I started to utilize retiring Coast Guard people and could pull in. When I got here, my situation was much the same. We had a lot of talent. Many of them who had worked for me in Florida were working for me here again, but they were high-priced. They were high-priced. They were older, nothing wrong with that. They had a home in Florida and family in Florida, and you're paying, besides the very high salaries, they're looking for per diem, which can be pretty pricey in and of itself. So I talked with Linda, and we have talked about curriculum, but I basically said, Linda, I really need people that you don't have to convince to move to the Eastern Shore. So we worked out a relationship where she, out of her pool, and John, give me their best and brightest, and I will say, on a particular year, I'm looking for someone with electrical experience, I'm looking for someone with mechanical experience, I'm looking for someone with HVAC heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. I'm looking for someone with computer and logistics skills, and they have started to give me 3 a year. And you'll see in the statistics, but it has been tremendous. So I actually give their foundation a stipend, and I have someone for 12 weeks. And you know, sometimes it doesn't work out, very rarely. Most times it has worked out, and I have changed the entire nature of my workforce, and I've got some statistics on that again, to where I now have a younger workforce that I pay a good salary, but it's not nearly what I was paying the people from Florida. They have been trained by the people from Florida, and many of whom have retired or gone back. And I have this very highly skilled workforce, homegrown. So this myth that, you know, everyone on the Eastern Shore is in agriculture or fishing is not true. There's some real talent there. Taking a similar approach with engineers, but it is a program that exceeded my expectations, and in our careers there aren't a lot of things that will exceed your expectations. This absolutely has. And Linda and Eastern Shore Community College, thank you again publicly. It's been a great partnership, and one that I know will be going for a long time here. So, as John mentioned, like riding a bike, when we hire the interns, I just tell them, especially the engineers. Technicians usually get it. I tell the engineers, we do dirty hands engineering. If you don't plan on working, don't come here, because you're not going to be sitting behind a desk. You will be sitting behind computers very often, but you're going to have to be out on the out at the launch pads, out in the work area, dirty hands in the middle of things, and learning how to ride a bike by skinning your knees and and your chin and everything else. Oh, and they all have a capstone project at the end of the year, and it's pretty impressive what they come up with. And we've had people come up with things that have saved us tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in improved efficiency. Statistics, we started in 2010 with 2 engineers. I showed up here in 2012. 2000 and just really 2013, it was into 2012. I got with Linda, and we started in 2014 our intern program ship, and let's see, is there a laser on here? Okay, so Eastern Shore Community College, out of the 27 we've had, 11 of those have come from Eastern Shore Community College. When we had the explosion in 2005, we scaled back, but we did not stop our internship program. And this year, we have 9 coming. So this is an organization that has 65 people, and we're bringing in 9 interns. That's a pretty good rate of coverage, but we do work them. And we've got from the area, mostly Virginia schools, and you know, almost half from Eastern Shore Community College. So here's what happened with my workforce. No pun intended, but the red are the contract workers, high-priced, very talented people, worked space all along, but you know, it's a lot of difference when you're paying the equivalent of, you know, almost $200,000 a year versus someone that is tickled pink to be paid $22, $25 an hour and have good benefits and everything. So a real significant shift in home growing our own space people. Just some pictures here, interns. We had 3 here from Eastern Shore Community College, Eastern Shore. These 2 are currently still employees here. This next year, Eastern Shore and Eastern Shore. This guy, we actually hired him before he had finished his 2-year degree because we needed his help so much, and he said he could work around the program and complete it. This guy excuse me. This gentleman here, if he keeps on his path, will be our lead technician. He'll be the person running all the technicians out there one of these days. It's up to him, but I mean, he is like he is as competent as a 15, 20-year person out there. And we work with some pretty incredible systems. We work with cryogenics, so minus 320 degrees, up to 6,000 PSI. You go from liquid nitrogen, liquid oxygen to gaseous, etc. And we do a lot of, I mean, sometimes it is rocket science, and these guys are all over it. This last year we had 3 women and 3 guys here, 2 from, again, Eastern Shore, Eastern Shore, Eastern Shore. All 3 of those are employees. We were not able to get any of the engineers to come. These 2 young ladies here, we made very good offers to them, but Orbital ATK, the company that has a rocket, wouldn't really talk to them before after they had done an internship with us. They both got hired at a higher salary from Orbital ATK than we could go to, even though we pay a competitive salary. So it's a great thing to be there. Great internship program. And want to talk about one of the things that we have here. As part of our charter, we're chartered for STEM. And we get paid a fee from Orbital ATK to launch the rocket, a pretty good fee. But they need to remain competitive, and we needed, as we negotiated a new contract, we needed to get more benefit out of this. So we're going to let Matt Kraft take over here, and I'll jump back in a time or two as we go along here. But he will talk to you about the whole ThinSat program and where we have come to with satellites.
Okay, where's your pointer? Right there?
That red one.
Red one. Hey everybody, my name is Matt Kraft. I'm with Twigg Space Labs, and unfortunately my other co-founder, Bob Twiggs, professor at Morehead State University, was unable to be here, so you get a fill-in today. But kind of before I start going over the educational ThinSat program that we have, I want to kind of take a step back, because I'm sure everybody thinks when you start thinking about a satellite, you think about one of these big giant satellites. It's the size of a school bus. You can see 3 people down here, so you can see it's a massive satellite. That's an InvaSat satellite. It's probably $1 billion satellite. You know, a lot of the satellites at DoD, NOAA, and all these other organizations launch are, you know, anywhere from $300 million to $1 billion satellite. But as electronics kind of got miniaturized, components started getting smaller, sensors started getting smaller, people were able to build smaller satellites with a lot of the same capabilities that you have in these giant satellites. Well, my co-founder, Professor Bob Twiggs, invented what's called the CubeSat standard. When he was a professor at Stanford University, he wanted his students to have the ability to go through the whole life cycle of designing and operating a satellite. So he came up with a standard of 10 centimeters cubed. His thought was he had students that were building these microsatellites, or a couple hundred pounds. He found out that the bigger the satellite bus, the more the students wanted to put into it, and the longer it took to build them, and the more it cost to launch them. So he kind of got frustrated, and he said, you know what, I'm going to come up with a small standard, make students put all their electronics and components and radios in this small size standard unit, and then we're going to launch them. Well, it took a long time to be able to get a launch of the CubeSat. Everybody thought you know, this is the craziest idea I've ever heard. It'll never work. You know, nobody was interested in it. So couldn't get a launch in the United States. So they went to Russia and launched it off a Dnipro rocket in 2003. All of a sudden, National Science Foundation got interested. So you know what? These things, you actually can do real science with these things. So they actually started funding a lot of different universities to develop CubeSat. So there are a lot of CubeSat programs out there in the United States. Well, guess what happens? With success comes cost. Well, everybody started flying these CubeSats, and all of a sudden the cost to launch these things went up through the roof. So his idea was, well, if it worked with CubeSats, let's make them smaller. Let's make something that's called a pocket cube. So basically it's 1/8 the size of a CubeSat. Well, you can kind of see the direction that we're going. Things keep getting smaller and smaller. Right now, you have Cornell University working on Sprite satellites. And the interesting thing is there's a great article in Scientific America in March that talks about these sprites or chips. They call them, this particular company calls theirs star chips. But they've got an investor, technology investor in Silicon Valley that's putting $100 million into launching these small stamp-sized satellites that have little sails on them, and they're going to be propelled at 1/5 the speed of light, and they want to go to Alpha Centauri. So it's our closest neighbor, right? So it's like 4.5, 4.7 light years away. If we were to have one of our rockets go there, it would take 30,000 years for a rocket to get there. Doing this propulsion through lasers, they're going to be able to get there in about 20 years. But it's incredible how the technology's advanced due to the miniaturization of electronics. Well, launch is a big thing, right? So whenever we started talking about developing a satellite program for kids, it's like, well, how are we going to get these things launched? Well, typically whenever you're getting a small satellite launched, either you ride a secondary payload on a rocket, so you're at the mercy of whoever the primary cargo is, or you catch a ride up to the International Space Station. You're launched from the International Space Station from an Antares deployer. And I just thought this was kind of a neat little picture here. It kind of shows you how a 1U satellite is being launched from the International Station. Here are 3 1U CubeSats. Picture was by NASA. But you can see these 3 1U CubeSats going across the front of these solar cells on the International Space Station. So it's kind of a neat picture. And here's what's called a 3U satellite. So basically it's just 3 of the 1U satellites put together. Now there's several companies that have commercialized that have a lot of commercial applications for these 3U satellites. A company, for example, Planet Labs. Planet Labs has about 130 of these satellites flying, imaging the Earth every day. 2 of Bob's students started a company called Skybox, and it was bought by Google for $500 million. So there's a lot of commercial applications in these small satellites that used to be that you had to have these gigantic satellites in order to make them work. So
I'll jump back in here. One of our charters is to provide STEM across Virginia. And we get a fee from orbital ATK on a big rocket, 140 feet tall, 13.5 feet in diameter, resupplies International Space Station, big rocket. To help them remain competitive, we kept the fee the same, but I said I want the equivalent of 12 CubeSats off each mission that goes up. And it will come off the second stage, and we'll point to that a little later on, which gives you 5 days in space. We didn't think we'd have a lot of interest on that. That's the bad news. It's only up there for 5 days. Sounding rockets, 40 minutes maybe. Good news is it's only up there for 5 days. You've all heard of space junk. I don't know if you saw Gravity with, who's the actress? Space junk is a problem. So it's up there. 5 days can be, as Professor Twigg said, can almost be an eternity to even university students. They lose interest after about 5 days, but you can do a lot of science in that period of time. So we came up with that, ran into the orbital ATK guys ran into Bob Twiggs at a conference, and it's an incredible hookup here that Bob, who is the innovator forever on these kinds of things, got all excited about it. We were looking at pocket cubes. We've gone to thin sats. Matt will talk about that more. But this is something we're rolling out across Virginia. There will be 84 of these that go in the same space, and looking for it to have a big impact on the STEM education here in Virginia.
But like John said, one of the things, Professor Twiggs has been in the education business for 35, 40 years, and like he said, he started the CubeSat program for college students to be able to go through the life cycle. But what research has shown is that you actually have to go further down into the education system. You have to get kids, like John said, in middle school. You have to reach out early. It's not like a kid shows up at community college or university with the math and science that they need to be successful doing things like this. So Bob wanted to kind of expand that program concept down into middle schools and high schools, and that's how we came up with the ThinSat program. So it's a 3-phase program. In phase 1, the students are provided with kits, electronic kits. They have little small chips that have a lot of different sensors, whether it's a UV sensor for light, whether it's temperature, initial motion unit. There's a lot of different sensors that the students can use to plug together. They're simple to use. and they can create a satellite. And that satellite can collect a lot of different data. It comes into a dashboard, and they can analyze that data. But you can see here, actually in South Africa, there are kids that are launching one of their weather satellites on a balloon. So in phase 1, they get these kits, they put them together, develop a weather satellite. They can fly them on a balloon, big party balloon that goes up to like 5 kilometers, or they can fly it on a UAV. In phase 2, they start working on their engineering model. Here's an example. Here's just a little demonstration unit of a ThinSat and what the size of a ThinSat is, and what here's some of the components are on the inside. But the students get a 3D printed model with a lot of the components in that ThinSat that make it look and act just like a real ThinSat that's going into orbit, that's going to fly. It doesn't have a radio, it doesn't have the battery, but it's got all the other components. It's got the flight processor in there. Students are going to build a payload that goes into that ThinSat. Half the ThinSat's available for a student payload. So the students can plug their payload into there and integrate it and test it and make sure it's working properly and collect data from it. Then they're going to send it to us, and we're going to send it up to a company called Near Space Launch, who's helping us manufacture these satellites. They're going to fly it on a high-altitude balloon to up to about 120,000 feet, so they're going to collect data up there. Phase 3 of the program is, so here's the high-altitude balloon. It gets up to about, the balloon gets about 25 feet in diameter, so it's a big balloon. It goes way up. The great thing about Near Space Launch is they've flown probably 400 or 500 balloon missions, and they've captured all their balloons. In phase 3, we're going to have Near Space Launch manufacture the satellites for us, but what we're going to do is we're going to take those student payloads that they're developed, and Twig Space Labs is going to integrate those payloads into the ThinSat, and then we're going to integrate those into a CSD and prepare those for launch at orbital ATK. Here's just a quick look at the ThinSat layout. There's one going around, so it kind of gives you a better look of it. So the ThinSats come with a list of standard sensors on it. There's also the ability to add additional sensors to it. For example, like an energetic particle detector or a plasma probe. So there's a lot of different things in this layer of the atmosphere that we need to research that's not being currently studied right now, because the thing is, nobody wants to put a satellite up into orbit if it's only going to last 5 days. Why would you develop a satellite that costs you $500,000 or more at a minimum with it only to last $5? That's part of the beauty of what we're doing, is we're creating basically what's the equivalent of a very sophisticated cell phone and putting it up there, and we're collecting data. We're beaming that data up to a global star network, and that data is being transmitted down to a dashboard where students can analyze it. NASA is extremely interested in this area of the atmosphere. All climatologists will tell you this is like the most exciting part of the atmosphere, but they really don't know a lot about it. Now, you've got satellites up in LEO, low Earth orbit, that are up there 350, 400 kilometers above space, and they shoot beams down there and they collect data. So it's really like an estimate of what the data is. We're going to be flying in that space collecting data, so we're going to know what the different aspects of it are. The satellites are going to be tethered together. Originally, whenever we came up with the concept of tethering the satellites together, it was from an operational perspective, from a licensing. Whenever you fly a satellite, you have to have an FCC license. You have to have an ITU license. So our original concept was to tether these satellites together so we can get one license. The other thing is it provides redundancy. Each one of those satellites has communication to it. Each one of those satellites may have different payload, different sensors, so you can kind of share across that string of satellites different things. For example, the mother satellite, which is the first satellite in the string, is going to have a camera. So that camera is going to be able to take pictures of all the other ThinSats that are flying behind it. One of them is going to have an energetic particle detector. So students get the opportunities to work in a team together with a lead institution, and we'll talk about those lead institutions here in just a second. Phase 3, whenever we get the student payloads, as I was talking about a second ago, whenever we get the student payloads from the schools, we're going to integrate it into that ThinSat, and then we have to integrate 21 of those satellites into one of these boxes on the left that's called a containerized satellite dispenser. That's a really fancy, expensive box that we have to mount to the orbital ATK rocket. They just don't let you stick these little satellites on there anyway, anywhere you want to. If you've got a $500,000 or $500 million payload, you want to make sure whatever's flying with you is secure, right? So as Dale said, we're going to have 4 of these boxes right here, these CSDs, and we're going to be able to fly 84 of those satellites.
Okay, and We'll go on the second stage here, and this just gives you a scope and the size of the rocket in and of itself, and this was basically wasted space on the rocket. And the total thing will weigh 70 pounds, 35 kilograms, 38 kilograms.
40 kilograms.
Okay, let's go to the next one. And it wouldn't be a presentation without a launch, right? So, one more. So we can't get you out there to a launch, but we'll show you one. This was our last launch here. There's the size of the rocket as it rolls the 1 mile out. Beautiful sight to see, believe me. This was return to flight, and we want to make sure they know they're headed to the International Space Station. We have that sign out there so they don't get lost. Stand the rocket up. Time phased. Had the rocket out there and the moon shining on it. Lucky harvest moon. And then we decided we were all good to go and headed off to space. It's tough to hold your breath that long, let me tell you. But it was a great launch. The rocket, the re-engined rocket, outperformed everything that they had expected. My engineers love to play with different things. Here's the thermal imaging one. The dark is cold. That's where the liquid oxygen is at. The kerosene, or RP1, is the lower part. And also, you can see things that may come off the rocket in this view too. So there are reasons that we go do that. Everything was perfect on it, but got to send it out of town. They could see it all over. Saw it in New York City, saw it in Richmond, saw it in Washington, D.C., and here's the business end of it. Looking up the flame trench. We've got a great camera. It's survived about 5 or 6 launches in a row. So, you know, we don't want to take it away. When it keeps working, we'll keep it there. All right. So, finish us up here, man.
Yeah, so basically you just saw the launch from the pad, but where do we deploy from? We talked about we're going to be below low Earth orbit. So the rocket's going to go up. About 10 minutes in, you're going to have a second stage separation. So that's when the Cygnus pulls away and then begins its final journey up to the International Space Station. So about 10 minutes into the flight, Cygnus pulls away. We get a green light from NASA. NASA says, you guys are good to deploy. So at that point, we'll deploy off of that second stage, somewhere around 200 and 250 kilometers. But as Dale indicated, the rocket, the new redesign on the rocket engines they had, outperformed, and I think they were up to around 280 kilometers the last time. So at that point, we're going to start deploying off those satellites. And as Dale said, at that altitude, they're only going to last for probably about 5 days. Well, we talked about data, right? This satellite, just like a phone, is basically like a very fancy tool to collect data. So that we view that as kind of one of the most important parts of what we're doing. It's not just the building of the satellite, it's actually the collecting of the data and analyzing the data. So we're going to have a dashboard where that data comes down. Students will be able to look at their data. They'll be able to look at data from other schools that are participating in that mission. And we'll archive that data so over historical missions, they'll be able to compare. Obviously, up in the atmosphere, you have solar flare activity, right? When you have high solar flare activity, the atmosphere is more dense and the satellites may last longer, okay? Low solar activity, they may be lower. So the life of these satellites may be, you know, they might last 3 or 4 days, they may last 11 days. So that will be a great learning experience for the students to say, well, I thought you said it was going to last 6 days or 5 days. Well, you know what? Based on the drag coefficient and based on what's going on in the atmosphere, it stayed up longer. The other thing is they'll be able to track their satellite. They'll get to see, you know, where their satellite is based on the GPS that we have in the satellites. One of the big things also is collaboration. We talked about, you know, we're going to have lead institutions. A lot of universities and community colleges in Virginia are going to be the lead institutions, and they're going to go out and they're going to solicit interest from high schools and middle schools in their area, and they're going to work with them. To me, that is a great marketing opportunity for the community colleges and universities to do community outreach, to go out and find great students, to kind of introduce them to your schools. You know, get them excited about what you're doing, get them excited about programs like this. So it's a great opportunity for you guys to bring in students and say, hey, look at the cool program we're working on. So we want them to collaborate. We want the universities to collaborate amongst themselves. I mean, there will be some great research that some of these university professors will write research papers on. They'll write white papers. They'll get published. So we want to have all that content in a common area where students can learn from it and share from it. The other thing we're doing is we're creating videos for the different things, whether it's Mars is creating some videos from their launch operations. There's going to be videos created manufacturing these satellites and manufacturing solar cells to go on these satellites. We're going to have a lot of good content that students can learn from. And then finally post their reports online where they can share them. But I guess the thing is, I want you to take away is that it's a three-phase program, and students are building different things on all three different phases, but they're collecting data from all three different phases, and they're analyzing that data. And what's different on Earth up to 120,000 feet and then up to 230 kilometers in space? What's the difference? What's going on there? You know, we talk about wasted space or unused space. The second stage of the rocket's not used right now. It's an unused asset. Why is it unused? Because people don't want to put an expensive satellite that only lasts a short period of time. But it's a great opportunity for STEM education. You know, it's unutilized. So, you know, we have an orbital life of about up to 5 days. One of the big things now is orbital debris. You know, if you talk to anybody in space, they're all concerned about orbital debris. Well, guess what? We're below where everybody else operates, so we don't have to worry about any collision, right? So we're below that. We don't have to worry about that. The other great thing is we've got a launch. Guess what? If you got astronauts on the space station, they got to eat, right? So they get pretty upset if those rockets don't get there on time with their food and supplies and clothes and letters. So with Dale having negotiated a deal with Orbital, we're going to have a ride probably twice a year, maybe more. So it provides a great opportunity. Great opportunity to study space in extreme low Earth orbit where there's not a lot of research being done right now. So like I said, we've reached out to NASA Langley, and Wallops, and Ames, and a lot of these guys are very excited about what we're doing, and they want to participate. They're going to put some sensors in. So I think that's a great opportunity for the universities and community colleges to kind of interact with NASA and be involved with them.
Okay, I'll talk like an attorney. I know we're all but out of time here. So lead institutions here. We've got Chincoteague Combined Schools. We've got Eastern Shore Community College. We've got Old Dominion, William and Mary, Hampton, University of Virginia, Virginia Tech, Wise School System, Twig Space Lab. We're having them obviously as here's the prototype, Near Space, which is associated with Taylor University, NASA Wallops and Langley. And one thing we believe is that this is a tremendous program for community colleges out there. We're oversold for the first flight. We won't drag you off. We won't give you a big bonus, but we'll let you go on the next flight. And we want to begin to book up years in advance. It's a great program, and that's it. Questions? Well, we're working the model out. The question was, how do others become involved? Contact us, work with us. Again, we've overbooked. Right now, I'm paying the whole fare, and probably will for the second go around on the ThinSats. That doesn't mean there won't have to be some money come in, but you don't need to go to anyone else to raise the money. You'll get the satellites, you'll get the launch, you'll get the deployment. What we really need are institutions that will not only do it at the community college, but reach out into the community area, the middle schools, the grade schools, the high schools, and that all the community colleges recruit anyway. What a great recruiting tool here. All right.
Thank you. This has been a great presentation. I'd like to thank all the presenters for the information that you've provided. One last parting bit of housekeeping. As you're going out this evening, please be sure to visit the NH17 app and provide an evaluation of the session so we can get your feedback. And thank you so much for coming to this session.